This whole roundtable has been a work in progress. And while we are focused on particularly the abduction and rescuing of children, and going after the perpetrators, I did want to include the effort to help with the trauma, and that there are a number of programs that are already at work. And so that is also, I think, would be an important part of our work. And so we will, at least with Bonnie here, introduce that part of, I think, the overall initiative. Our discussion here is really what can be done in Washington, and to assess where things are. And I can't think of a better group of individuals to have this discussion. Let me start with Marta Fedoriw. I'll introduce everybody and then do the discussion. Marta Fedoriw and I are, I guess, both refugee children after World War II. We weren't born in Ukraine and we weren't born here. We were, as I say, born on the way. So we have perhaps some emotional ties to this issue because of what our families experience. Marta has been an activist in the state of Pennsylvania. She, I think, first started her activities working with Congressman Don Ritter. He was actually the first organizer of the Baltic and Ukraine caucus in Congress. And she continues to work with Congressman Ritter now in their Victims of Communism organization. But currently, well, that's current as well, but she is also the one that has been working very closely with Congresswoman Susan Well, from whom we heard this morning, about advocating on this very important issue, and the resolutions that has been introduced. And in addition, Marta is the chair of the Ukrainian National Women's League of America, of the initiative called Return Ukraine's Children. And so this is going to be a very important, I think, partner in what all we are trying to do. Marta was also engaged and involved in the wonderful discussion in the UN on February the 22nd. So in addition, we have Shelby Magid from the Atlantic Council. Shelby is Deputy Director of the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center, overseeing the programming and policy work, fundraising, and generally, she's the go-to person. We have worked with the Atlantic Council forever, and Shelby is my go-to person at the Atlantic Council. She's a doer and a go-getter. And so we are really glad to have the Atlantic Council as part of our work on this very important issue. We also have with us Maryna Baydyuk from United Help Ukraine. And you have everybody's bios on our website. But Maryna is the one who helped organize United Help Ukraine, which has been doing yeoman's work on the humanitarian side, but also working on this issue. So she's a research professor assistant at Georgetown. And Maryna, I didn't realize that you are a molecular cellular biology you're a scientist. So, and I can even say some of those words. Let's say she created United Help Ukraine, and she's what we call one of the Maidan-born organization, and a very, very successful organization. Then we also have Katya Pavlevych, whose colleague we heard on the previous panel. She's working with the Ukrainian PR Army, and also is working with Razom on this issue of kidnapped children, deportation of children. She's a graduate of international communications from Shevchenko University, and she joined the Ukrainian PR Army as volunteer. And since 2022, she's also joined as in the initiative of Where Are Our People, which is dedicated to the deportation of Ukrainians by Russia. And last but not least, my dear friend, Bonnie Carroll, who is the head of TAPS. It's the Tragedy Assistance Program for Military Survivors. Bonnie is an incredibly energizer bunny. She's a military veteran. She's also a surviving spouse of Brigadier General Tom Carroll and founder of TAP's organization. She has traveled all over the world, helping set up programs which are to helping members surviving a military death. And in 2019, I believe, Bonnie traveled to Ukraine and they set up a chapter in Dnipro. And so she has been on the ground ever since then. And I think one of the reasons I really wanted Bonnie to take part today, because they have such an extensive experience and background in working with trauma for all family members, but particularly children. I loved the program that you have, which is called Good Grief, how to help children manage the grief. And certainly in Ukraine, not only are we concerned about these children who will be rescued, but if you think about it, as was pointed out, all the children of Ukraine are suffering of trauma of one kind or another. So without further ado, I'm going to start. Marta, I'm going to ask you to take away and tell us about your work with U.S Ukraine.
Thank you. Thank you, most of all, to the U.S. Ukraine Foundation for organizing this roundtable. I'm a longtime member of the Ukrainian National Women's League of America, otherwise in Ukrainian known as U.S Ukraine Ameriki. And actually, Nadia, I was inspired by you and a previous webinar you held where you talked about this tragedy of Ukrainian children being taken from their parents and placed in Russian homes, et cetera, et cetera. So we got our group together and we formed with the UN, through the UNWLA, the organization titled, or initiative, I should call it, titled Rescue Ukraine's Children. And one of the first ideas I had was, we can't do this alone. We need to coordinate with other organizations. And you're the first person I called. So thank you again for organizing this. And so many esteemed panelists and guests. Basically, the way our initiative is working now, and it's only been about 2 months that we began. We actually initiated it at the UN conference where I had a chance to read remarks from Congresswoman Susan Wild. We decided to work in two ways. One is raising awareness, and the other one is advocacy. Let me talk about raising awareness. We are preparing a press packet for our members. We have 65 chapters throughout the United States of women who are ready to do things like hold demonstrations, rallies, prayer meetings, and so on, and communicate with the media in their localities, whether it's Chicago, Philadelphia, New York, or little towns in Texas, for example. So we are preparing a press packet, which we will pass out to all our members, and we will be most willing to share with anyone on this panel or any other organizations that are going to cooperate. That's the first area. The second, and it's very important too, is advocacy. As you have heard earlier, my Congresswoman, Susan Wild from Pennsylvania 7 District, had introduced last year in the last Congress, the 117th Congress, the House Resolution number 149. But this was almost at the end of December, and a new Congress came in January, so she reintroduced it in February. It is now, the action that has been taken is, there is a co-sponsor, Congresswoman Ann Wagner, a Republican, so it's bipartisan. And there is so far another co-sponsor. And once it was submitted to the U.S. Congress, it is now in the House Foreign Relations Committee for further actions. And I'm going to appeal to everyone here who is an American citizen or has a friend who is an American citizen, please call your member of Congress today or as soon as you can to support House Resolution number 149. The very important factor about this resolution is basically to condemn Russia. Yes, they call it for the abduction of Ukraine's children. Maybe later on, we're going to work out a glossary of terms, how we will identify each of these situations. For example, instead of re-education, brainwashing, as you suggest, Nadia, or not use the word abduction, whatever, we could possibly research the various terms and provide everyone with a glossary of terms, words to use when we are talking with the media or our members of Congress about this. But anyway, back to House Resolution 149. It is extremely important because in the third part of the introduction, Congresswoman Susan Wild writes, forcibly transferring children of one group to another group is a violation of Article 2, small e, of the Genocide Convention. And we know that Russia is a co-signatory of the Genocide Convention in 1951. And they admittedly talk, Putin himself and Maria Lvova-Belova, his commissioner on children's rights, if that's what it can be called, they admittedly talk about taking children from Ukraine in occupied territories and transferring them to their country where they brainwash them to become Russian citizens and so on. So this is extremely important because there is a concurrent resolution in Congress, but it doesn't mention that this is an act of genocide. So this one is extremely important. It's now in the House Foreign Relations Committee where it's awaiting further action. And the action is very important to come from us, the American citizens, to call our members of Congress to ask them to support this House Resolution 149. So we are, as I began, we are working in two ways. One is raising awareness, and the other is advocacy. Why this is so important is that by having a resolution passed like this, the resolution in itself is it's called, basically it calls attention to this terrible crime. We have the wind behind our backs in a way because the ICC has called for an arrest warrant for Putin for this crime of taking away children from their parents and moving them to another country, to Russia. So we need to work on this because following the passage of this House Resolution 149, we will be able to effectively reach out to various organizations, various government entities to continue this work, which the final goal is to bring these children home, to return Ukraine's children. Thank you.
Thank you, Marta. Yes, if you had a chance to listen to the other panels, I divided the discussion sort of what I would say the sort of the policy centers, where we had sort of the EU and what's going on in Ukraine, and then sort of the what's particularly the UN, and of course we're focused on Washington. And Janice from the Helsinki Commission participated in the global one, but we've been working with her as well. The Helsinki Commission has had a number of hearings, and they're possibly also going to be preparing some legislation, which is slightly different. But I think all of this has really demonstrated that we do need to have some network, at least of communication of where things stand and where the pressure points are. And of course, one of the things, the legal group that we pulled together at the very beginning that clearly identified the kidnapping of children as genocide. I was reminded just in the previous panel that the warrant does not accuse Putin of genocide. even though it's clearly stated. So again, even there's more work to be done to clearly, charge them with the crime of genocide. I'm next going to ask Shelby. As I said, Shelby, we've worked with the Atlantic Council for decades, and we have worked together on key issues like the National Security, Task Force of Friends of Ukraine Network, where Ambassador Herbst is the chair of it. We've got members of Atlantic Council that are working with us on a reconstituted task force on reconstruction and recovery. And so now be looking again to work with you and the Atlantic Council to perhaps pull together a group of experts, primarily legal experts, who can help us in making some of these legal, understanding these legal situations and where we can be in terms of what kind of advocacy. So Shelby, I'll just ask you to say a few words. And when was the last time you were in Ukraine? I think you've been there more recently than I have.
Thank you so much, Nadia. And thank you, everyone. I'm really honored to be here with such a distinguished panel and with this list of organizations that you've gathered. I think this is exactly what we need. I was last in Ukraine for the 1-year mark for February 24th, Nadia, and I'm going back in May. As you mentioned, the Atlantic Council covers Ukraine and Russia and all aspects related to both the war and then Ukraine in general, have been before the full-scale invasion, but are we've amped up. We talk about security a lot, but one thing that I think that is important about this issue is that it pulls in different audiences. So I think a lot of us here today are on the same page. We support Ukraine and have been supporting Ukraine. But something that is a goal of mine is to use the Atlantic Council's platform and to connect with organizations like everyone represented here on the panels and in the audience to continue to build out and talk to more people. So I'm not going to repeat what I think we already all know. This is an aspect of genocide. This is horrific. It's a crime. We agree on that. But there are still a lot of people that either don't support Ukraine because they are susceptible to propaganda or they're disinterested, unengaged. I've had it personally where I've told people, okay, so you don't care about geopolitics, national security. What do you think about murdering of kids? And I'm sorry to put it that bluntly, but how do you feel about that? How do you feel about kidnapping? That changes the conversation. So not to be too, manipulative, but I believe in pulling heartstrings, and I don't think there's anything else, any other topic that is more black and white than this. So working with other organizations, the Atlantic Council has been trying to raise awareness. And I was shocked that more people did not know about this topic until even the ICC news came out, but I think there's still more people to learn about it. Working on advocacy, a lot of overlap, Marta, of what you were talking about of your activities. We do congressional relations, we do public and private briefings, but I'm always looking to get more information. So please, Marta, I want that press packet, and anyone else. We publish writings. We engage with policy leaders, but also just people in every town possible in the U.S. And abroad. This issue is not going away, but it has momentum right now. So I want to build there while possible to engage. And then just going back to pulling in different audiences. Part of my work is engaging with as many people as possible. On this, Putin has been saying that Russia supports family values. They've even used the humanitarian lie. So I try to amplify this issue with as much evidence as possible to directly contradict that. And I have found that it can resonate with some of the more conservative groups, some religious communities as well. So any ideas on who else to tap into, I think would be a great outcome from convenings like this. So I'm open and very glad to be a participant. Thank you very much, Nadia.
Thank you, Shelby. I think I don't think we need to be apologetic about pulling the heartstrings, because this is part of Putin's war against Ukraine. And we just had a webinar, including where your boss, John Herbst, participated, the National Security Council, and General Breedlove included this whole issue in his presentation, because this is definitely, people cannot turn their eye about this issue. The whole issue of Ukraine winning is not just about a piece of territory here or there. This is bringing people to justice and to for these horrific crimes. Bonnie, I'm going to ask you to next talk about, first of all, thank you for all the work that you've been doing in Ukraine. And I know that, you started in Dnipro, but your program has grown. And, you started, I guess, was it 19? And boy, what a blessing that you were able to start then, because I think you're playing an incredible, important role now. So I don't remember when's the last time you were there. If you would please share kind of what you and TAPS are doing in Dnipro and what you see as next steps where we could go with supporting, particularly on the trauma side.
Absolutely wonderful, Nadia. Thank you so much for having me in it. It's actually in 2015, after the war, that the U.S. State Department came to us and asked if our American organization, which provides services to all those impacted by a death in the American military, could mentor the creation of a similar organization in Ukraine. And it was that group that came over from Dnipro, who were just amazing, absolutely absorbed everything. And that was when we started going back and forth. So started meeting with the military, meeting with surviving families, presenting materials which could be easily and immediately translated. So, we found that grief transcends borders, languages, everything. It really is just mending those broken hearts. So our American families embrace the Ukrainian families, and this has been an extraordinary collaboration for 7 or 8 years now. I was just there in September, and we had the chance to do, again, trainings. When the war started in February a year ago, TAPS Ukraine, as they've called it, was so well positioned, not only to provide that trauma support for families and stand up an organization, but they actually, because of their level of organization, created a national volunteer network of support. So in Dnipro, they've got a very large volunteer coordination center that serves thousands of people. They've engaged now 70 psychologists. We've gotten funding from Boeing to do actually in-person good grief camps. I love that you love that name, but opportunities for the children who have been impacted by the war now to come together locally in regions across the country. They also brought a group of children to the west, to the Carpathian Mountain region, to have an in-person away good grief camp. And it was extraordinarily successful. Boeing has already funded 3 more camps. We've been working with the government of Romania, who have agreed to host a camp for Ukrainian children there in Razom region. So the momentum is building, support for the children, as you said, an understanding of the trauma these kids have experienced. Not only the kids who have lost someone, but the kids who have lived in a time of fear and anxiety. The team that we have is very well trained. They actually will be coming, we have a delegation of 5 who will be coming to the United States in the end of May for our big national gathering. And they'll receive more training then and an opportunity now to expand programs to include a military mentor program such as we have in the U.S. This is an opportunity for soldiers to reset, to find resiliency, to gain coping tools while working with children. So it's kind of a unique way to allow particularly younger service members to play, to find that healing and resilience with kids who have experienced trauma, where they can speak honestly and openly about the traumas they have experienced. It creates a safe space. And we've been doing this now for 25 years very successfully in the U.S. with our combat veterans. We're excited now that they're going to be modeling that. But wonderful programs. TAPS Ukraine is incredibly active on many levels. They're also managing many of the funerals, the honors, the presentation of awards, and morgue operations in the region to honor the fallen and care for those who are left behind. But I'm so grateful to just be with this group now and share these resources. There's nothing more important that we can do than coming together to elevate each of our programs to help each other be stronger.
So Bonnie, how could I have misspoken? You opened the chapter 19 because I came to your annual Memorial Day, right, convention where you bring in how many thousands of families?
2,500 survivors attend that weekend. It's a
Right.
huge event.
Yeah, and so you invited me, and that was when you had the group from Dnipro, as we were getting organized. But also we've had when we had the women veterans come
Yes.
through a couple of years ago, we came to you and visited with you. Yeah, it's just amazing. Just all that you have been able to accomplish in Ukraine. And again, what a blessing that you were able to start way back in 15. So thank you.
Wonderful. Well, and bringing our relationships, when we were there in Ukraine in September, we did Zoom calls with the First Lady, Jill Biden, with Hillary Clinton, our former Secretary of State, bringing that awareness of what the surviving families, the women and are doing to now care for each other, and creating that resilience center in the East with now 70 psychologists on staff who are working 24/7, just around the clock, offering opportunities for those who need it to get that reset and resilience support.
Yeah, I have, and I know we talked several months ago, and still on our agenda is to have a separate webinar discussion that will bring in more information about these various trauma programs and organizations that are engaged in this. So that's something that we hope to do in the near future. So perhaps I should now then go to Maryna, because among the various programs that you have, you are also supporting programs to help children deal with trauma. So Maryna, please tell us about your work in regards to this overall issues, but also maybe about the trauma support programs.
Yes. Hi, Nadia. Thank you so much to you and U.S. Ukraine Foundation for this wonderful discussion. This morning was very productive and very informative for all of us. I think we've learned certain things, reaffirmed some of the programs that we're already carrying, that they're super important. And I will probably touch upon our psychological program. But first, we probably will share some of the ideas with Bonnie and others. But I also want to say thank you to Marta and Shelby for doing the advocacy and raising awareness work. Our organization, I Help Ukraine, is also participating in several initiatives to raise awareness and advocate for Ukraine. We're part of the American Coalition for Ukraine that just had a second advocacy summit. We've organized a workshop, and Nadia, you were telling that I'm professor at Georgetown University. This is the site of the workshop that we used for the second time in a row. And I really tried to engage American students to come to those workshops and come to the up to the Capitol, listen to what our representatives, Ukrainian descent representatives, get to say about things that are happening on the ground. And I think it's very important to start advocating and start educating American public, and that's what Shelby is doing in Atlantic Council quite effectively, but advocating from a very early age. And I'm trying to bring a lot of organizations, student organizations within DC area. We have Ukrainian organizations at Georgetown, American University. We have those organizations across the US. We should definitely organize similar events to talk to the young and very, very bright, talented, and passionate people who are trying to make a difference in this world right now. With this, the American Coalition for Ukraine brings in over 370 participants just in the past 2 days that we're advocating for several resolutions. And Marta, you're bringing up a forced transfer of children, HRS 149. This was also on our agenda, and your organization, Ukrainian National Women's League of America, and Katya's organization, Razom, have been sponsored and very active participants of this initiative, which I think is very important, and it's growing. So having those coalitions, and what Nadia is doing here is absolutely amazing as well. bringing us together, sharing our thoughts, ideas, and seeing how we can move forward, I think will be absolutely important. And with this resolution, there is another one we also discussed during this advocacy days on the Hill, is genocide resolution. So this is another resolution that's absolutely important for all of us to bring that to our representatives and their attention, that those two go hand by hand, side by side, and definitely need to be considered and hopefully voted on at the House and then Senate levels. So besides participating in advocacy and raising awareness, our organization from March of 2022 actively started our psychological program. From the very beginning, from the first weeks and months, a group of psychologists who are now program directors for psychological aid, or we call it family resilience program, started thinking how we can help children with trauma on the ground. And I know, Bonnie, you're doing amazing work bringing those children to and bring help and psychological assistance to children in Ukraine. And what we've been doing since March of 2022 is, first, we started with working with children with severe traumatic experiences. And if you remember, of course, back in March and April, those are kids in Kyiv region who survived Bucha genocide, Irpin genocide, kids from Kharkiv, Kherson regions who really suffered quite heavily from different types of trauma that we should really think about. Any kid in Ukraine probably suffers from some sort of a trauma, because sitting in a bomb shelter for 2 weeks, right, with no light, no water, experiencing death of your loved ones, really, sitting under shelling for hours or days. And even we think about now, and I went to Ukraine in December, no electricity for days, right, for hours. Or hearing the siren when you're at school every single hour and just like going up and down to the bomb shelter. So a lot of children, we know most of them probably will have certain issues. And we started with first a more severe trauma, and we partnered with Israeli group and we brought them in. And what they've been doing is, first of all, training psychologists on their method. And we continue now with the different methods. And so I think the biggest part for trauma and involvement of Ukrainian psychologists is to train as many as possible using different types of interventions and methods, so they can have tools to approach psychological trauma for children. And we've been quite successfully helping them. We have really great results after several interventions that children experience first anxiety and fear. And with the method that we've established with Israeli colleagues, it helped dramatically children in Ukraine. We've helped over 6,000 children in the period of 4 or 5 months. And what we also decided that, and this is something that we see for children who are in Ukraine, but I think the children who are going to be returned from their forced deportation, they will be really, this is something different that we have to think about, and how we're going to approach their trauma, because that will be very different from children who are experiencing trauma in Ukraine. Those who were deported would be a totally different story. And we decided for ourselves that to help children in a better way, we really need also to help adults and their parents and caregivers. So we have now started expanding our psychological family resilience program to engage psychologists on methods that would help parents cope with their stress, and also be, understand how they can help their children as well. And another group, so we go from little kids, and then we also include adolescent children, who is probably the most challenging group to work with. We hope that we can expand our program even more in terms of family resilience. And we're talking to Ministry of Social Policies in Ukraine, and we're hoping that we can bring it to the next level, incorporate some of our findings, some of our methods that we already did a pilot work on, and we have really good results to incorporate it to what now the Ministry of Social Policies sees as a next step, to have centers in Ukraine which will have family programs and which will include veterans coming back from the war with all kinds of types of PTSD, families that had some trauma, loss, grievance, and others, and children, of course. So we're hoping to incorporate some of our programs into this more global network of psychologists in Ukraine. And we receive a lot of requests and a lot of ideas how to bring also the program on supporting warriors with PTSD, again, to the level, systemic standard level, that we all can participate and participate in understanding how it works, with the transparency that organizations who bring in funds and sponsor them also participate in decision-making. So for us as an organization, I hope others will join as well, get our tools that we've developed in the past year, get our knowledge that we acquired in the year of war, and bring it up to the standards, stable level that can be used throughout Ukraine, not just focally here and there where we are located, for example, but and share this knowledge with more people. So we continue supporting a lot of psychological centers in Ukraine, but we hope to do more and on the bigger scale. So this is something that we'll be focusing on this year. And besides that, we are helping with medical aid, humanitarian aid, but I think the initiatives to help children come back and then give them all the support that they need to reintegrate in the family, in Ukrainian society, will be absolutely crucial for Ukraine to prosper, for Ukrainian future. We all know kids are our future. So that's going to be absolutely essential to give those kids who are coming from deportation everything they need to reintegrate, recover, and have faith in humanity again.
Oh, thank you, Maryna. Well, I think you just underscored the need for us to have that special discussion or webinar on the various trauma programs, because, you know, Bonnie's got, what, 25 years of experience organizationally to deal. What I was so impressed with, they had programs for every member of the family, whether it was the spouse, the child. And then, you know, we've been in Ukraine for over 30 years. And so in 2014, you know, we started to work on humanitarian issues. And of course, one had to do with veterans, you know, wounded warriors. And we worked with General Pavlevych and others. So there's been, you know, there's a lot of organizations, I think, that have some expertise. I think it would be really important and helpful for you all to get together. Now, absolutely, you're right. There's different levels of trauma. You know, I mentioned Marta and I are, you know, World War II refugee children. And I remember April of last year when I was watching the news, and just for some reason it hit me. And I thought I was glad my parents were not alive to sort of relive that trauma. But I then was thinking, well, you know, when we immigrated, I had both my mother and my father with me. You know, and I tell the story where we slept together, and every night I held my father's thumb because I didn't want to leave him in the morning, and I'd wake up and I had a wad of paper that I was hanging on to. And then I was looking at all the images from Ukraine, and it was all the mothers, right, with the children, because the fathers are fighting. And I thought, what an incredible, huge burden, another layer of trauma that these mothers and the women are experiencing, and the children. And so, yes, absolutely. I was very sorry that Mykola Kuleba, who heads up Save Ukraine, was not able to join in the last panel, because he's been, I think, one of the most successful in terms of rescuing children. And they do have special centers for dealing children's trauma for those who have been rescued. because we know from the experience here in the United States that reintegration is can be very challenging. And even with prisoners of war, when they first meet their family members, I know here in the United States, they have, psychologists. It isn't like they come and there's an instant, you want to hug them and hold them. So these are very specialized cases and require, certain, different kinds of approaches. So yes. We're supporting, you mentioned about how traumatized, one of the programs we support is art therapy. And so we've heard like children who aren't able to speak, but also, you're mentioning about the adults. And so we were learning too, that a lot of times the parent don't really know how to deal with the children's trauma. And so you're right, it can't be just the child. You have to sort of deal with the whole family unit. And I think this is where, Bonnie's program really is amazing, because they do deal with the whole unit, and they have specialized program for each. And of course, for PTSD, fantastic work. And I'm anxious for us to organize that discussion, focusing on trauma. Katya, we heard quite a bit from your colleague, Anastasia, in the last session, rightfully, I would say, level of frustration and concern about how challenging it is to move some of these international institutions to action. But tell us about what you've been doing regarding these issues of, the kidnapped children, both in your work, as I say, with the PR Army, as you're calling it, and also, I guess, the advocacy work that you're helping at Razom.
Thank you, Nadia, for gathering such I would say, comprehensive panels on all the various topics of child deportation. It's a very complicated subject and can be covered just like from one angle. Just a few words, like in previous panel, my colleague Anastasia, she talked a little bit about what PR Army does. We started on February 24th just by answering journalistic requests that start pouring into Ukraine with the invasion. And our mission was to provide journalists with the correct information, to connect them with witnesses, experts from Ukraine, to provide them any kind of help they need to do their jobs. With time, we developed different directions we work with. And one of the directions was deportation of Ukrainians that at that time when we started didn't receive enough coverage in media, as we believe, even though the scales of the problem were huge. So Anastasia became the head of the direction initiative called Where Are People, that I'm a volunteer at, which is dedicated solely to the topic of deportation of Ukrainians to Russia. We started working mostly with the media, so we would find witnesses of deportation, victims of deportation, both children, mostly their parents, and adults, to talk to the press and to increase awareness about this issue before we expand into reaching out to like policymakers, decision makers. Right now, I am focusing on advocacy efforts in the U.S., although media and communications is still a big part of that. So that's we like a part of this is how I work with Razom. I'm like an advisor on child deportation topics within the Razom advocacy team. So this is just in a nutshell what we do. I would like to address first the question in the Q&A chat that I think is very important to address about the numbers of deported children and how we should all unite on this and use the same number of deported children and why they're all different. This is one of the most tricky questions when we talk about deportation because it takes place in occupied areas. So the first answer when somebody asks you, well, how many children have been deported is we don't know for sure because it happens on occupied areas and Russia does not reveal or share any records, etc., etc. However, the number that has been heavily quoted today is almost 20,000 deported children. This is the number provided by the General Prosecutor Office that it is verified cases that they have in their possession of children that has been deported. It means they know their names and are open an investigation into that crime. However, it does not reflect the full scale of the problem. The estimates of how many kids have actually been deported vary from 200,000 to as high as 700,000 children that is quoted by Russian propaganda resources. And these numbers are changing. When I started working on the topic, the number of deported kids and the verified cases was 9,000. Right now, it's almost 20,000 because we learn more new information, more new cases as we reach out to new people and we liberate territories, et cetera, et cetera. I would like to, I hope this gives a little bit of a clear understanding of why the numbers are different, why they'll change, and they will change. In a couple of months, I'm afraid this number will grow, and we may never know like the real numbers of children, but we have to understand we're talking about hundreds of thousands of kids. The next item I would like to move on is the advocacy efforts that were mentioned before that multiple organizations in the US are doing. And I want to fully support the resolution that was, House resolution that was mentioned before, 149, that does call deportation what it is, an act of genocide. Recently, there was also introduced a resolution in the Senate by Senator Peters. Its number is 158. And it also, it's actually has a little bit like updated wording that we discussed today. It actually talks about deportation and forcible transfer of children. And it also calls and refers to the genocide convention and to that portal Children of War that is gathering the number of verified cases of deported kids. So talking about what can be done, what can we do as advocates is to, yes, call your representatives and ask them to support these resolutions. Multiple resolutions have been introduced in the previous Congress and in this Congress. And while this is a great first step that has to be taken, this is not enough. But even this has not been done yet, even though we know about bipartisan support from members of Congress and Senate on this topic. But we need to get it done. We need to get adopted and move on the second and other items on the agenda. So what could be done, I think, is there are three main areas of how the topic of deportation of children should be approached: how to return these kids right now, how to stop deportation and prevent it in the future, and how to hold people responsible for it accountable. And when we talk about the US advocacy specifically, what can be done in Washington in terms how to return children now, I hate to admit that the US, no matter how badly we want the US to solve all the problems, has its limits, and its impact in returning children is limited. Why we were able to learn and like to have Nuremberg, that hearing that is referred before, is exactly because like we were actually physically in Germany, taking Berlin, and we accessed all the records and all the cases. This is not the case with Russia. So the US cannot just get into Russia and get all the records. We need to force Russia to do it, and we need independent third party that would mediate this process, which ideally any international organization or like any country could be, including the UN, the Red Cross, or whoever is up to the challenge. So what the US can do is to urge its representatives in the UN to take action, is to call a hearing on the topic of deportation and ask the representatives from American Red Cross to appear and report on what has been done, what's the obstacles, et cetera, et cetera. So this is what we've been advocating for, and we believe that what also can be done is the US can put sanctions that have been also mentioned before on people responsible for it, to discourage people below or other people who are not sanctioned yet or identified yet, to discourage them from continuing it and try to ruin this process from within. We compiled a big list of people that was available easily in open resources, but it's not extensive. The system of deportation in Russia is enormous, and they did have like a huge experience of doing it back in Soviet times, so they got work done very well. We need to sanction more people from the top chain, so whoever is below and not attacked it yet is discouraged to continue doing it now. And we had the representatives of like Helping to Leave, Save Ukraine, who are already individually, but still like executing some returns of some children, at least those that they were able to do. I was shocked to learn that organizations like Helping to Leave are still operating on like private donations. This should be funded by money like much larger than any volunteer organization can gather. So if the US can support already any volunteer efforts taking place and successfully returning kids, it should. Of course, we talk about the topic of deportation in like larger perspective, we must realize that once we get to peace negotiations, the return of all the deported Ukrainians should be a condition of any peace negotiations. We cannot settle for giving up any part of our land, because that's where the kids will be taken and deported from. So the way to return children in the US can affect is to make that repatriation of kids a condition for any peace agreement it may have with Russia, because once we corner Russia on the battlefield, and this is something that many policymakers don't understand, Russia will use children and Ukrainians actually as a bargaining chip to get away and from the crimes they committed. So we have to start returning children now rather than wait for it to happen later, because if it happens later, they will use those kids like the terrorists are using hostages to negotiate a better deal out of this war. And I think keeping the awareness high is important. That's why the roundtable like ours, I think, are very important. There was recently a hearing on Russian war crimes with the General Prosecutor of Ukraine, which was, I think, very powerful. I think it is worth initiating a separate hearing on the topic of deportation, exactly because it has so many nuances. And after talking to like many offices in the Congress, in the House, in the Senate, there is an understanding that it happens, but there is lack of understanding how, why, what are the like implications. So I believe like public hearings or briefings with a member of Congress would be crucial and still crucial, even though it seems like what else there is to say. Moving on a second like item, how to stop and prevent deportations in the future. I'm gonna reiterate just simple message: occupation is deportation, and liberation of Ukraine is the only way to stop deportations once and for all. And I can't emphasize it more. There is a big allure to settle and give away something like Crimea to save the rest of Ukraine. But doing that, and we must communicate it to our representatives, by doing that, we're giving up all the children in Crimea, and we are exposing them to deportation. So liberation of all the land of Ukraine, deportation of all of its people is the only way to stop deportations. Security guarantees to prevent further invasion of Russia, because any invasion of Russia is deportation, war crimes, etc., etc. And of course, to hold people accountable to discourage further acts of deportation in the future. And talking about accountability, we mentioned the ICC arrest warrant multiple times. There is no united view of its implications, but recognizing any power of ICC is a tricky topic in the US. We heard suggestions to create special tribunal in the US on holding people accountable, which actually enforces measures, accountability measures in the US, but I believe that global responsibility, global international law is like going through a crisis of enforcement. And we cannot rely on ICC warrant to do anything if some countries choose to abide it and some not. So I would not expect from the US to like expect Southern Africa to abide to this warrant if the US is not willing to move on it. But then this is something that has to be discussed. ICC obviously is not the only mechanism of enforcement, but we have to think about global perspective and the play and the role the US has in the global security. There was a resolution 7583 before introduced to support international criminal investigation. However, it has been shut down. I think it is worth to negotiate and maybe find an alternative solution to it. I think sharing information with investigators from Ukraine, anyone from the US side, would be very valuable to track children, because as mentioned before, tracking children, where they went, how they've been adopted, is the hardest part. And any intelligence the US can share should be shared with parties who are executing the search. And the last suggestion for us, the civil society, the organizations working for it, is to unite. I can just like offer what can we expect, what we as aware people can help others with is, of course, briefings on the topic. We've been working closely with many like international lawyers in Ukraine and offices like General Prosecutor Office, Human Rights or Children Rights Commissioner's offices. So if you want to advocate on the topic, but you lack any stories or details, we offer briefings on it. We offer media support. If you have something to reach out to journalists, feel free to reach out to me. We offer some stories of witnesses. We talk to some witnesses and work with those who are ready to share their stories. On behalf of Razom, of course, you can rely on us as an advocating partner in this. We also have and unite like a lot of advocates for Ukraine. So if you go to Razom website, and on the advocacy page, you can become an advocate for Ukraine and advocate for this topic among other topics that Razom is advocating for. And also just to mention the importance of mental health and psychological support for traumatized children. I would appreciate if anyone reach out and share their achievements in this area, because we do work with witnesses and we would love to provide them with some help, not just source information from them in this area. Razom has opened 2 mental health facilities in Ivano-Frankivsk and Lviv. And just to share a staggering statistics of among 800 people those facilities served, 50% are children, 75% of adults who've been served there are women, and 65% of those 800 people saw a mental health specialist for the first time. And this is the future of Ukraine. It's also, I believe, important to talk to help people relieve this trauma so it's not passed to further generations.
Thank you, Katya. I think, again, your report underscores the need for us to actually do more coordination and cooperation together, because I think, we've been working in Ukraine for over 30 years, and our mission has been split, certainly since the war, has been on advocacy and, of course, humanitarian work, which has included, as I mentioned earlier, focusing on veterans issues and humanitarian issues. I think one of the reasons, first of all, I want to thank everybody for their patience as we organize this roundtable. The goal of this roundtable was to just begin, I think, the process of bringing together the activists and organizations that are focused in this issue, but not only those that are already working in Ukraine. I think, Maryna, you mentioned working with Israel. The idea is also to bring in expertise from other organizations that have been working these issues for decades. They may not be in Ukraine now, but they certainly have experience and best practices to share. And also they can become part of our advocacy and informational. So this is just the first step to begin to build this coalition of activists and organizations. And I think also what's important, I know that I've heard before, actually somebody in my office said, oh, gee, the ICC, why did it take them so long to make the ruling? And I said, on the contrary, given how these bodies move, that was lightning speed, believe it or not. The ability to move some of these major international institutions is just, Herculean effort. But we are seeing progress. And that is also why I think we want to focus on having the legal experts to identify what are the different channels to different organizations, and then have a strategy of what to pursue in each of them. Because collectively they can move the needle. And look, just the stuff at the UN, that's been discussed last year. But finally there's some traction. I think the Yale report was very, very helpful. The ICC ruling, if nothing else, it put a spotlight on this whole issue. So you have to take advantage of each little, if you want to say, a step to pull it in together into an overall strategy. So I can share your frustration, but believe me, we are seeing minuscule, I think, progress, and we have to build momentum. And that's why I wanted to have this roundtable now to build on this momentum. The hearing last week, the sessions at the UN, the ICC. But I also have been talking to some of you about the idea of actually pulling together a larger summit in September, which will give us more time to organize in specific working groups. And also our international people will, be able to come and travel, those that are working in the EU or the like. So as I say, I see this as just a first step. I'm sort of, I guess, summarizing, I'm doing my closing remarks. All right, but before I do any more of that, so why don't I just give everybody a minute if you wanted to just say something in conclusion. Marta.
Well, thank you very much. I think that in a way we've met our goal today, which was, as you say, to meet to see how each organization or individual even can work so that we can coordinate our efforts. And I've outlined, we have an organization with 65 chapters throughout the United States. We can do a lot of raising awareness and advocacy. And then we'll see as we go along where else we can find the resources and the ability to coordinate with everyone. So thank you again very much for putting this together. It was a big job and an important job.
Well, thanks for everybody cooperating. Shelby?
All I can do is say I agree with all the brilliance here and echo my thanks, Nadia, and everyone involved. Thank you very much. And I hope to work with you more going forward.
Bonnie?
On behalf of TAPS and TAPS Ukraine, thank you so much. We look forward to partnering with all of you for the sake of the children of Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you, Bonnie. Okay, Maryna?
Yes, thank you all so much for being here. I would like to thank all the panelists here who participated. It was great to hear the amazing work that all organizations are doing. And so the next step is to work harder here in Washington, D.C., to move institutions to make sure they do their best and fast. I think that's the important part. And also continue our collaboration and work together on providing help on the ground in different directions.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Katya?
Thank you, everyone. I learned a lot yet again. Thank you for listening, gave an opportunity to vent a little bit about the griefs and feelings, frustrations Ukrainians are facing advocating for this topic. I would just to thank everyone and reiterate the previous message. Let's push for impossible, because we've seen the boundaries of impossible be moved at least a dozen times since the beginning of invasion. So that's probably the only thing I can ask for us. Ask for impossible to achieve something that you actually want, and we will move all the organizations under lightning speed.
Well, thank you. I think, Marta, thank you for saying I think we reached our goal, because I've learned a lot. It was good to hear sort of the broad spectrum of activity. I think we can continue via email communications. I think that oh, somebody says scam lightly. Maybe I can take a minute. In terms of, I must say, in terms of sort of the resolutions that are being introduced, I think we shouldn't be discouraged about the process or the pace. I think one thing that we need to understand, that a lot of resolutions get introduced because a constituent has gone and asked for the resolution. And then there's that whole process of reconciling different resolutions, right? And so that's cumbersome, and it takes a while if you have House and you have Senate. But in terms of also, I think, there was very strong discussion at the Foreign Relations Committees, and I know there was discussion on the Senate side. I think the Helsinki Commission is uniquely positioned to provide, I think, to play a leadership role, because they span both bodies, and they often are the ones who can pull together, particularly in issues of human rights. And so I know we've got Janice, who was on the previous panel. She could have talked to both. We've been talking with them, and I know several of you have also been engaged with them. So we will look to see. I know they were talking about introducing legislation. So, there's this is a work in progress, and I think I feel like we're stronger for having come together. And the idea of doing something in the September, several of us are having discussions about perhaps actually, asking for trouble, but to have something take place during the UNGA, but also to have something take place in Washington. So we'll be chatting offline about all of that. Are there any questions? I can't see the questions. Were there any questions that came in on chat that we haven't dealt with? Okay, we have also from, let's see, Bob McConnell. I wonder who that is. He's a guest. So I think the United States government, White House, Congress should be expressing public outrage about these war crimes and genocide. The American people need to have these realities pushed into their consciousness as a part of understanding why Ukraine must win this war, and why the U.S. must be committed to Ukrainian victory. Yes, the White House will say it has done so, but I respectfully disagree. We need the White House to use their microphone even more. Then, Marsha Bambuk, it is difficult to send a clear message to public about how many children have been forcibly taken. This was about the variety of numbers. I think that it was Maryna, right, who discussed the issue of the numbers. Or
that was Katya.
Yeah, again, to say the number of 20,000 is the one where they are registered within the Ukrainian government, right, in the website. The other are numbers that the Russians themselves boast that they have hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian children. So that is one of the challenges, is to identify not only the number, but where these children are. Then from Tamara Disenko, thank you for informative roundtable coordination with USUF. I look forward to welcoming Rochester, open world delegation focused on establishing family and children counseling networks. I hope professionals from Dnipro and other cities across Ukraine will be included in the delegation in September. Thank you, Bonnie, for establishing TAPS in Dnipro, visiting Rochester when Mayor Filatov and Dnipro city officials were a special guest in April of 18. So, yes. I think that takes care of it. Again, thank you everybody for listening, and Slava Ukraini.
Героям слава.
Героям слава.